everybody. We are going to get right back to it. I left you off at kind of a cliffhanger, and so we are going to see what happens to our little heroes. Remember, when we last left off, we discovered that Milligan is Kate's dad, and he is there to save the day if they can't save themselves. So here we go. We are starting on the chapter that is called The Best Medicine, and it is page 449. You, Mr. Curtin repeated, looming over the children and glowering in particular at Rainey. You betrayed me. After all I did for you, I welcomed you into my institute, soothed your fears with my whisper, offered you a role in my improvement, and after all of this, you chose to defy me. I don't suppose you'd accept an apology, Sticky offered. A very cheeky response for him, especially since he was too petrified by the sight of Mr. Curtin's towering figure even to reach for his spectacles, though every bone in his body wanted to give them a terrific polishing. Mr. Curtin laughed, a terrifying screech owl laugh, and said, Oh, no, I'm afraid not, George, but I thank you for reminding me how pathetic children are. Quick to follow, quicker still to flee. Yes, quite painful and annoying as gnats, but certainly not a threat. To think you hoped. What did you hope for anyway? To defeat me? But you're only children. Mr. Curtin erupted into laughter again, a long fit of convulsive screeching. Calming himself with some effort, he said, Well, no matter. I needn't dirty my hands clutching your grubby little collars. I'll summon my executives to bear you off. Mr. Curtin turned to walk back to his chair. He paused, however, at the sight of Rainey Muldoon's penetrating stare. The boy's eyes shifted rapidly back and forth, as if calculating something with great concentration. Before Mr. Curtin could ask what the devil he was doing, Rainey said aloud, as if to himself, Okay, so it isn't laughter. What are you blathering about, Reynard? Mr. Curtin demanded. Rainey hardly seemed to hear him. With Mr. Benedict, it's usually laughter that does it. But if it's not laughter with you, then what? It must be something. Otherwise, you wouldn't strap yourself so carefully in. You're so afraid of losing control. But how exactly? Mr. Curtin's eyebrows shot up. His entire head quivered like a struck bell. I have no idea. What the devil are you? Snakes, and I haven't time for your childish, he sputtered. Yes, you're definitely afraid of something, Rainey said more forcefully, his eyes lighting up. The chair, the straps, the reflective glasses, they're all there to keep your secret safe from the children. But why are you so afraid of children? Maybe that's why you keep saying we're so harmless. You're trying to convince yourself. In fact, you're scared to death of us. You're like a tiger, afraid of mice. Why else would you stand there shaking in your boots? It's not from fear, you insignificant speck of dust, he roared. Mr. Curtin, his face livid with rage. How dare you? I'll crush you all like the gnats you are. And with that, he sprang forward, only to drop in a green plaid heap at the children's feet, where he promptly began to snore. Mr. Benedict, Mr. Curtin, they're twins, so they have this in common. Remember, there's something that when Mr. Benedict gets really emotional, either high or low, he kind of faints, right? And so they're trying to figure out what it is with Mr. Curtin. Rainey's breath escaped in a whoosh of relief. Then he nodded. Laughter usually puts Mr. Benedict to sleep. With Mr. Curtin, it's anger. Quick, Sticky, let's tie him up with our sashes. Sticky released Constance's hand, which in his fright he had unconsciously seized and loosened his sash. So that's the reason for the chair and the glasses? When he gets really mad, he goes to sleep, but he doesn't want anyone to know. All those times, he seemed so furious, and then suddenly got quiet, Rainey said, knotting his sash around Mr. Curtin's ankles. I always thought he was getting ready to kill me, but really, he was just asleep. Fellas, said Constance, he's awake. The boys jumped back. Sure enough, Mr. Curtin's eyes were open and looking wildly about. When they fell upon Rainey's face, they narrowed with hatred. Oh, that's right, he said, yawning. I was on my way over to kill you. But what is this? Sashes? Surely you don't think mere ribbons could restrain me. Rainey's face fell. I sort of hoped they would. Then you are even more foolish than I perceived you to be, said Mr. Curtin. And spreading his arms and legs with one powerful thrust, he ripped the sashes right in two. If we're so foolish, Constance shouted before he could rise, then what does that say about you? You made the boys messengers, even though they always intended to betray you. And we've tricked you again and again. We even know about your narcolepsy, though you tried so hard to hide it. If we're foolish, then you're the greatest fool of all, since we're obviously much smarter than you. For a moment, Mr. Curtin trembled violently, unable to form words in his fury. Then he closed his eyes and sank back upon the floor. That was fun, Constance said. Oh, if there's one thing Constance is good at, it is making people very angry and irritated. So she's going to keep trying to do that, I assume, to keep Mr. Curtin angry and getting more and more angry. That was close, Sticky said. But now what? There's nothing else to tie him up with. How about this rope? Cried a familiar voice, and to their surprise, Kate Weatherall suddenly leaped in through the open window. She was a welcome sight, but a terrible one. Her cheeks were scratched and bleeding. Her lips were swollen. Her clothes were torn. Her hair stuck out in all directions. And on top of this, she was streaked with mud. Yet she seemed cheerful as ever they'd seen her. Bruised, black eyes, shining with happiness, and her bloody lips spread into a terrific grin. As she knelt to bind Mr. Curtin's hands and feet, Kate eagerly told them what happened. Your father? I can't believe it, Sticky cried. So that's why Milligan disappeared all those years ago. He was captured on a mission. But why has he disappeared now? Constance demanded. Shouldn't he be here? He said he was going for help. I didn't take time to ask for details. I thought you'd need me. Rainey nudged the slumbering Mr. Curtin with his toe. It's good you came when you did. Otherwise, he'd have throttled us when he woke up. So now what? Constance asked. Rainey was already moving towards the Whisperer. I've been thinking about what Mr. Curtin said, that the Whisperer is sensitive. How did he say it exactly, Sticky? A sensitive, delicately balanced machine that requires his strict mental guidance for its proper function. Exactly. And we also know that its computers are modeled on Mr. Curtin's brain. Well, if it's so sensitive and delicate, and if it's like a brain, we ought to be able to confuse it. Maybe we can trick it into shutting itself down. That's your plan? Constance asked doubtfully. Any machine can be turned off, Rainey said, if only you know how. So let's figure out how. He pulled Mr. Curtin's red helmet down onto his head. Instantly, he heard the Whisperer asking his name. Ladrotha Curtin, Rainey barked out, just as he had heard Mr. Curtin do. You are not Ladrotha Curtin, came the reply. Rainey took a deep breath. He had to trick the Whisperer, had to think just as Mr. Curtin would. Concentrating with all his might, he tried to imagine what a genius was, and how pleasant life would be once he was known as Master Curtin, and what a nuisance children were. I am Ladrotha Curtain, he declared again. There was a pause. Could the whisperer be hesitating? Was it uncertain? I must control it, Rainey thought, which definitely reminded him of Mr. Curtin. Focusing on these words, he redoubled his concentration. Control it, he thought. Control it, control it. The pause stretched out. In his mind, he thought he could hear a clicking sound, like the tumblers of a lock. This really might work.